Hey there. So today I'm going to be doing a little breakdown of the tournaments that happened over the weekend at the UK Games Expo. There were three big Star Wars Unlimited tournaments, one on May 31st, one on June 1st, one on June 2nd. What I'm going to do, talk a little bit about kind of the meta composition for each of these individual tournaments, and then I'll be opening up some deck lists for the winners and checking out if there's any new tech, what kind of decks won, and just kind of give you my thoughts. So first off, we've got the first tournament. It was a May 31st tournament, and it was 121 players. Pretty unsurprising that Boba Fett was the most played deck at 30 players played it. It's about a quarter of the field. It had a positive win rate, as you can see there during the Swiss. Sabine was the second most played deck, and I think, again, that's pretty standard. Those two decks are likely going to be the most popular decks in most tournaments. After that, pretty big drop-offs to Vader and Iden. These were probably control decks. This isn't broken down by the basis. I don't know if, for instance, some of these Vader decks were playing green and more of like the big mid-range deck, or if they were playing blue and more of the hard control deck. Same with Iden, were they playing mono blue for the hard control or green for the soft control. Unclear, but I would assume most of these were probably in the hard control variant. And then, you get some Lukes, some Hans here, Krennic, Churret, and it quickly drops in meta share. I think we can look maybe a little bit at win percentages. Darth Vader had an almost 60% win rate at 11 players, so that's pretty high for that amount of a meta share. And again, it's pretty nice to nice if you like Boba, but Boba being a quarter of the field and still maintaining a positive win rate is big, because whenever you have a huge meta share of it for a deck, a lot of its matchups are going to be mirror matches, which means the win rate during a mirror match is always 50%. So when a deck with a big meta share has an above 50% win rate, it means it's probably beating up on a lot of other decks, and that's probably what happened here. We have some poor showings from like Luke, who 40% is incredibly low for a win rate. Han didn't do too great. After that, once you're in like 7-6, like the amount of players, the percentages are like 6%, 5%. At that point, I think regular variance kind of takes over. It's not really worth looking at the win percentage at that point. All right, so I'm gonna next go to the June 1st before I dive into like the top 8s and stuff. So June 1st, the top two, same two, Boba and Sabine at about 20% and 16% meta share. Here we actually have Han making a really big jump in how many players played it. Had 16 players of the 128, and it had an incredible win rate of 60%. That is very high, so it did very well during the Swiss. Darth Vader, again, showing up at a high player rate, but an absolutely atrocious win rate of 36%. Past that, we have just smatterings, right? We got Krennic, Leia, Emperor, Iden, and Luke all at like 9-8 players. Not much going on there. Once again, Boba Fett at a big meta share, maintained a very high win rate, but this time Sabine, even with its high meta share, had a pretty poor win rate. Under 50% with that many players means that it did not do well and was likely getting targeted not only by Boba and like the mono yellow Boba decks, but Han. Han has a pretty good Sabine matchup, and we see here Han had a very high meta share and a very high win rate, so that's probably what ended up happening there. All right, and the next one is going to be the June 2nd. So this one had no top cut, had 115 players. Once again, Boba, Sabine, 1 and 2. This time, their win rates right around 50%, so didn't do amazing. And Han, once again, at the third most played and did do pretty well here. This is the first tournament that we see Iden in the fourth most played, and it had a very good win rate. And then we're down into like the sub 8% meta share for the rest of the decks. So their win rates, are going to be much more affected by individual like players doing either really well or really poorly. All right. So next, we are going to start talking about the decks. So for May 31st, this is our top 8. We had a Boba Fett won the whole thing. Sabine in second place. In third and fourth place were another Sabine and another Boba. And then rounding up the top 8 were 3 more Bobas and a Darth Vader. So we had 5 Bobas up here, 2 Sabines, and a Darth Vader. Gonna go. I've not looked at any of these decks, so I'm gonna be kind of talking to them about them off the cuff. So let's see here. So this is a mono yellow Boba that won the whole event. Mono yellow, there's not tons to innovate right now, especially in the sideboard because of the card pool. But this person actually managed to find a way to change it up from most of the lists I've seen. They're playing Snapshot Reflexes in the main deck. They're playing Outer Rim Headhunter in the main deck. They're playing Change of Heart in the main deck. All cards that I generally don't see getting played very much. Oh, and Syndicate Lackeys replaced Bosk in the main deck. He's not playing Bosk at all. So Snapshot Reflexes mostly has taken the place of Shoot First in the main deck here. Now it offers more upside in terms of like sustained damage. Obviously, when you're playing against decks where you are killing units, a lot of time that's Sabine. Shoot First is one of the best cards you could possibly be playing in that matchup. But against something like a control deck that you're just trying to push damage, I mean, Shoot First does 1 to their base, Snapshot does 1, and then sometimes it'll do another if that unit survives and hits again. So that seems to be why they chose that. Syndicate Lackeys over Bosk. I guess if you're expecting more 5 health units that you need to kill, maybe it was a concession to being able to one-shot Boba Fett unit in the mirror. But I like Bosk's 5 health in the mirror too, because it can attack into other Bosks and into the Boba leader without dying. So both of those seem relevant. But I've seen Syndicate Lackeys certainly in sideboards. Other than that, Change of Heart is usually I see as a sideboard card, maybe for like control decks where you're trying to take a big capital ship and hope that that wins. They opted to put them in the main deck. I wonder if it played well in a mirror. I mean, Boba was everywhere, so you probably needed to be able to win mirrors, and I wonder if it was kind of helpful there. In the sideboard, sorry, don't mind my face. That's a Bounty Hunter crew in the bottom right. They did have the Shoot First, likely for the aggro matchup. The Confiscates, I think, for decks playing Entrenched as removal. And they added just like a smattering of more cheap units. Mining Guild also might be just for control matchups where they're trying to get more card advantage, and then just extra cheap units for aggro and to like go face if they're trying to like cut a bunch of the events that are not very good against control decks. All right. So I'm going to look at the second place deck. So this is a Sabine yellow and red. Okay. So I don't know why I said red, surprisingly. It's a yellow-red Sabine. Okay. I'm not seeing, like, again, much changes to what I've normally seen in Sabine yellow decks. Sneak Attack has proven to be very good for them to close out games. It is a more space-dominant deck than the Sabine green lists. It gets to play Millennium Falcon. These decks also play Liberator gunships sometimes as another space unit. It's a burn deck. It's much more of a burn deck than the green version, right? Like you're getting sneak attacks, you're getting surprise strikes, you're getting falcons. You're doing more damage from hand than the green decks. And as such, yeah, like that's really it. I don't have much else to say about this. Sabine Yellow is a very good deck. It's going to steal a bunch of games. It can push damage even when you think you've stabilized against them. Sideboard here, mostly standard stuff. They got Sparks for control decks, and Sometimes I've seen Spark in the main deck too, so that's something you can consider there. Wolf for anti-heal, disabling Fang Fighters for, you know, people playing Entrenched, maybe to hit a Churret's lightsaber or something. Other than that, we've got, well, maybe there's one interesting card here is Rogue Operative, because I often see Ezra in this slot. Rogue Operative having Saboteur, especially if you're expecting a lot of Child Sins, I think is a pretty solid inclusion. All right, so number 3, we're just going to look at this quickly. This is a Sabine Green, so they also looked like they opted to go even bigger than most Sabine Greens. I see 3 copies of U-Wing Reinforcements. We've got the standard package of K2 and Steadfast Battalion as like your main energy conversion lab targets. They've also playing more 3-drops than I usually see. They have Echo Base Defender and Fighters for Freedom in the main deck. But again, overall, it's a pretty straightforward list at this point. They're opting not to play any droids. They're opting not to play any Bright Hopes. They're going much more into just like 2-drop, 3-drop. There are no 1-drops in this main deck, which I think, I mean, it worked out for them. I usually think at least Spec Force Soldier is kind of needed to not kind of have no outs to a big Sentinel. But past that, looks pretty good. All right, the other 3rd or 4th place deck is another Boba Yellow. This one looks a little more like the deck that I'm used to seeing, right? It's got Bosk, although they did shave one of them for Syndicate Lackeys, and there's no change of hearts here. They're playing Shoot First and not the Snapshot Reflexes. But other than those changes, which I already talked about in the first list, the rest of the deck is mostly the same. And this deck is incredibly clean, and it's going to win a lot. It can outrace aggro decks. It's got outs into control decks because of Bodhi helping there, and Cunning just being able to push so much damage so quickly. It's just a very tight list. All right, we're just going to look at 5 here. It's another Boba Yellow deck. This one has AT-RTs in it, so trying to play a little stronger into aggro because it's playing more early vehicles. We've got Mining Guild Ties in the main deck, I guess, to help trigger that. And then you've got the Spacers and the 7th Fleet. But most of the rest is the same. All right. Another Boba. I know, it's exciting. It's another Boba Yellow. So we're not seeing much green in the Boba these days. This deck has 1 Change of Heart in the main deck. And a bunch of other good cards. All right. Next. Oh, we finally found one. So we got a green Boba here. Which is still a good deck, by the way. They're playing Spark of Rebellion in the main deck, which, you know, again, this deck in particular struggled much more into the hard control decks than the yellow version. And I guess having Spark main deck is in consideration of that. That card could just be a Bodhi instead. A 5-cost Bodhi might be better than a 4-cost Spark. But they opted for Spark here. They are playing Cunnings in the main deck for 6. The rest of this stuff, right? It's ramp. They got the whole ramp package. We're going to from 3 to 5 ideally, so we can play a Steadfast or a Bosk, make a giant flip turn, curve into Fire Spray Invader. It's worked before. It still works now. And they did pretty well. Finished in 7th place. Or I guess 5th place. 5th through 8th place. And the last one is a Darth Vader deck. So here we got Blue-Red Vader. And this one is very different than like the Blue-Red Vader decks I am used to. It is still playing for an end game that revolves around Super Laser Blast and Vigilance and just draining your opponent's resources. But But they're playing Force Surrender in the main deck. I guess for mirrors, they're playing Bombing Run, which I haven't seen too much of. I haven't found that card to be too effective, but you know, they put it in there. They got restocks in the main deck. And then, you know, for the sideboard is just for the mirror matches where you're playing all these yellow cards. I mean, Spark of Rebellion costs 6 in this deck. Bounty Hunter Crew costs 8. But those are to help in case your restocks get discarded from your deck or from your hand. So you can bring them back. The Spark of Rebellion is to rip your opponent's restocks or vigilances in these mirror matches. You got Regional Governor to help with that too. All in all, although some of the card choices are a little different, this is still just that real hard control deck. You're playing very few units, a bunch of removal. You're trying to capitalize on a Super Laser Blast into Darth Vader, into Avenger to mostly close out games. And then in certain matchups, you're relying on the Vigilance restock loop to win through attrition. All right, that was it for the top 8 on May 31st. Now I'll go through the one on June 1st. So the winner here was an Iden deck. And this Iden deck was the mono blue. So again, hard control, similar to what we just talked about with Vader. Iden does a very similar game. Iden is better into aggro decks because Iden heals and comes out quicker, helps you stabilize more against aggro. Vader tends to be maybe a little better into like bigger decks because the leader is much more impactful. But although we're not playing any red cards here, the deck operates mostly the same. Removal, 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 heal, 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 Super Laser Blast, attrition, win with Avenger, or win with Vigilance, discarding your opponent's deck out, right? They're doing the same sideboard stuff. Well, not all the same, some of the same. Spark of Rebellion to rip out restocks and vigilances, restock an extra restock for your own deck. That would actually put them on 3. But then they got this 3 Galactic Ambition, 3 Relentless plan, and that's very clever. That's almost surely just to beat mirror matches where Relentless is an absolute nightmare for these decks to deal with. Trust me, I think like blue-green control decks that ramp into Relentless and like have Regional Governor and just like Darth Vader's can pose a problem for these hard control decks just because those decks can go wide and then Relentless can kind of close the door. Well, this deck here, this mono blue Iden is borrowing a little bit of that. It wants to get Relentless. It doesn't really want to pay 11 for it. It's going to pay 7 for it. And it's going to slam a Relentless down pretty early in a mirror match. And that might just straight up win the game, especially if they can back it up with like a Regional Governor to protect it. So I like that plan. I think this is really cool to see. I think that's a good one. All right, second place is a Boba Green. Okay, they're playing Recruit. I really like Recruit in these decks. I think that floating resource happens a lot with Boba Fett, and Boba Fett has tendencies to sometimes clunk out because it just doesn't have that much of a top end, and so much of it is just predicated on like, do you draw Fire Spray into Vader? Yes, you're gonna win a lot of games where that happens, and Recruit's gonna help with that. They went with main deck Star Vipers to target aggro a little harder. And yeah, I think this doesn't look like they made too much of a concession into the hard control decks. I'm not surprised that this deck ended up losing to the one we just saw, the mono blue Iden deck. It has a very hard time beating those decks. But, you know, it beat a lot of other things to get here. All right, in third place, I got a Han Green. So first Han we've seen. And this one's cool. I mean, there's a lot of weird cards here. I think when you're playing U-Wing Reinforcements, sometimes you're able to squeeze in some stranger cards as part of a package there. We've got a Frontline Shuttle, which is a card I very rarely have seen get played. What else? You got... Oh, this guy, the Patrolling V-Wing, is another card I don't see very often. But I think like the Frontline Shuttle, the interesting thing about it is like with U-Wing, if you bring something that couldn't attack that turn, you can potentially get an attack off of it. or if you have something in play that's already attacked. So it's an interesting card. I think the power level on it isn't huge, but it's sort of a toolbox. I guess that's what this player was going for. Spark of Rebellion continues to be kind of everywhere. It's a very important card. It's, I think, one of the main draws to even being in Hero Yellow right now. And yeah, they're playing a lot of ambush units. That's typical of a Han deck. The full 3 home ones, which I really like, but they also got 3 reinforcement walkers. So this is just a huge top end. And yeah, they did really well. I think the sideboard looks like they brought some more toolboxy cards. Bodhi, for instance, would cost only 3 off of a Ewing reinforcement, so that's a nice add. 3 Change of Hearts might be a little too much for my taste, but yeah, I like the Han green deck. I think it plays pretty cleanly, and this one just has like some cards I haven't seen much, like the V-Wing and the shuttle, but player did really well. All right, we got another Boba. This is back to the mono yellow. I think this looks very similar to one of the lists we saw before. They got Spark of Rebellion in the sideboard to help with control decks. Yeah, the rest is, you know, the standard curve of units into just a bunch of damage. I don't have much more to say about it. We've gone through like 6 Boba yellow decks right now. All right, another Boba, this time's green. Ooh, Relentless in the main deck. So, you know, that's one way to say I want to beat these control decks. It could be effective, right? I think Relentless is a very good card against those decks. And if you're putting enough pressure on them and forcing them to answer your other things and you're able to slam that down, that might give you enough time to win. And it looks like they're also playing Chimeras. Probably also, I mean, you play Chimera and you just like say Super Laser Blast, and if they have it in their hand, they don't anymore. So I've never seen Chimera in a deck before. So first time for everything. And yeah, confiscates have become pretty important in a world where people are playing Entrenched as removal, especially if you are not playing red. All right. We got another Iden, and this is back to green Iden. So this is not like the hardcore vigilance mill control. This is a more soft control deck. It's a unit-based control deck. Playing Energy Conversion Lab. We're using like Rooks with that most likely, or like Star Vipers against aggro decks. We've got a really big top end. So this deck is trying to go over some other smaller control decks too. But basically, you're playing the low cost removal. You're capitalizing on barrages, Darth Vader's, like the power green cards, the ramp. And Iden has always been a very good shell for this deck. It still is. And what else? I guess I will note that they're only playing 1 Vigilance, and I've seen most blue decks at this point, especially controlling blue decks, have just been playing 3 of that card. It's proven to be really strong. And some decks are using it to mill, but mostly in these decks it's to kill something and heal. But it looks like they opted to just have 1 in the main, added a 2nd in the side, and they're more comfortable going with big units. All right, and then we've got the last 2 to see are 2 more Han decks. So this is another Han green deck. Didn't have as many of the like toolboxy units, but they got Homestead Militia, which I think is a pretty good pull off of the U-Wing reinforcement because a 3/4 Sentinel is generally more impactful than a 4/3 Sentinel. Playing Shoot Firsts in the main deck to help with aggro matchups. The sideboard, again, it looks like everyone likes this Bodhi in their U-Wing decks. They're playing restocks themselves. I'm not sure exactly why, because I don't think there's ever a case where you're going to like win a game because you restock to stop yourself from getting milled. I think if you're going that far into a game against control, you are likely already going to lose. So I'm not sure restock is like a good like counter plan to that style of play, but I'd wonder if it worked. I mean, unfortunately, I was not do not know if it did the thing. So it's just my gut is saying that it probably isn't something that's going to help you win against control decks trying to mill you out. All right, and last for this top 8 is another Han Green deck, and this one looks closer to the one we just went over. Yeah, not much different here, except I see they're also playing the shoot first. So yeah, this is a very similar deck. The numbers are a little different in some of the cards, but for the most part, same core. All right, so this is the event, the June 2nd one, that did not have a top 8. So I just want to look at the top 2 decks here because they went 6-0, so they were first place and second place. I guess because this person who's this 6-0, his opponent's win rate was 68%. And the other 6-0 win rate was 55%. So it looks like number 1 here had a much harder strength of schedule and took it. And that's why he gets the first place. This is a Vader green deck, so it is not a control deck as much. This is more of a giant mid-rangey ramp deck. This is a clean list. Vader green has typically struggled mightily against Sabine decks, but if you dodge them, this deck has very good matchups across the board into other decks, especially mid-range decks like Han and Boba, and then other decks like the soft control decks like Iden green and Krennic green. It can fight with Palpatine because like the villain red is just a very strong like mid-range plan. And yeah, like I see 3 Piets, so this likely the idea behind that is to get one of those out with Vader, and then follow up turn with Reinforcement Walker or Palpatine to just completely shut the game. They are playing a ton of removal, 3 force chokes, 3 open fires. They're playing the full 6 1-drops to play, like have a turn 1 1-drop with a Vader ping. And I think that is wise. I see 3 Stormtrooper lieutenants. So I think this person made a conscious effort to do the best they can to make their aggro matchup even better. They're playing so many low-cost units, the Stormtrooper lieutenants to help those low-cost units trade with their opponent's stuff, all the removal they could muster, and then just enough top end to close out games with Vader himself. So I like this deck. I like how this player built this. This is kind of how I would play Vader green, and I think it's a pretty good meta call right now if you can stomach a not very good Sabine matchup. But hey, this player still did as much as he could for his main deck to help in those matchups. And maybe one other thing I might change is to have extra Relentless in the sideboard for these like blue Vaders and the mono blue Idens. I just think Relentless is so important and so good in those matchups that I think I would just like either go 2-2 Relentless Devastator or even just play the full 3 Relentless. And I think other than that, I don't have much else to say I would change here. This looks very tight. All right, and the last deck I'll look at is the other 6-0. This is a Palpatine blue deck. So Palpatine blue is like, I still consider this a soft control deck. I don't. It's not like the mill decks like the mono blue Idens and the red Vader, blue Vader. Sorry. This is still a unit-based control deck. It's just like the biggest version of the soft control decks. This will beat up on like the Iden green and Krennic green just because the Palpatine leader himself is so much more important in those matchups. But this player is making some calls about what they expect, and Super Laser Blast is certainly one of them, playing a full 3. I don't usually see them in that abundance, especially in Palpatine, who he kind of acts as his own Super Laser Blast by stealing a unit when he comes out. There's a lot of top end here. Palpatine, similar to Vader, is bad against Sabine. It's even worse, honestly. You have to really just say, hey, I will either never play against Sabine, or when I do, I will have equity because I am the better player. But Sabine has an incredibly good matchup against this deck. No matter how many vigilances you put in it, no matter how many make-in openings you put in it, no matter how many sentinels you jam in it, Sabine will be favored if the players are, of comparable skill. Okay, so that's what you do when you play Palpatine. You kind of, I don't hate what this player did. He kind of isn't playing too much to beat Sabine. Like he's not jamming. Well, I'll take that back a little bit. They are playing 3 Star Vipers and 2 make-in openings, both of which maybe are okay into Sabine. I mean, without energy conversion lab, Star Viper is not very strong in my opinion. But I'm not playing like Repairs and Devotion's main deck, which is something you could try to do if you want to help your game 1 against Sabine. There's no Lieutenant Charlton, which is another card that, again, against Sabine could help. It won't make you favored. But this deck as a whole is good into a lot of matchups similar to the Vader green deck, right? It beats Boba decks. This can beat the hard control decks because of a relentless plan, and you see all 3 are in the sideboard for this player. He could have put one in the main deck if he wanted to, chose all 3. There's a few things I want to talk about here because they opted for 1 restock main and then restock and Sparks of Rebellion in the sideboard. So they're saying, I'm going to try to like counter the mill plan with my own mill plan. And I think that is mostly a trap for these decks. I think if you're going to if you want to beat the hard control decks game 1 with a mill plan, you need to have the whole package in your main deck because those decks, they revolve around beating you with that plan. A lot of them are already main decking things like Spark of Rebellion, extra copies of Restock, Bounty Hunter Cruise, etc. So if you want to be able to beat those decks with your mill plan, it needs to be your primary plan. And I just do not think Green Villain needs that as their plan. I think the general plan of Vaders into Relentlesses into like whatever, right? All these cards generate units. Reinforcement Walker gives you extra cards, big ships. And then like if you want to play Emperor's Legion, which is a card I would really recommend for those because like buying back a Vader is like buying back 2 units. It just puts enough pressure on them, and Relentless and Regional Governor can really close the door on those decks. I don't think you need to try to get cute and like play your own restock. I don't know what 1 restock in a main deck actually accomplishes. It's never going to save you against those decks. Now, to this player's credit, they did decide like, yeah, an extra restock wasn't going to help me either. I need to actually bring in my own Sparks of Rebellion for this matchup. Unfortunately, I still just don't think it's necessary, and I still don't think you're going to be favored if that's your plan. I'd rather just double down on the big stuff and buying back the big stuff and beat him the good old-fashioned way. Another consideration there is because of time concerns. If you lose game 1 to a mill-off, you're just never going to finish game 2 and 3 if you're trying to like restock Vigilance Loop and Spark of Rebellion them. Like you need to beat them with unit damage. You can't have 30-minute, 40-minute games. So again, it is in my opinion that if you're playing blue-green villain, you do not need to play restocks and you do not need to play Sparks. You can just play all the Relentlesses in the world, Emperor's Legions, little units, invaders, and I think you'll mostly be okay in those matchups. They're not free by any means, but I think that it's a better play line than trying to like one up them on their primary game plan. All right. Okay, so that's it. I hope some of this was helpful. I know we're nearing kind of the end of a meta cycle. There's only about a month until the pre-releases for the next set. We're already deep into spoiler season, having about half the second set revealed. So a lot of play testing is probably already transitioned into that for a lot of players. But, there's definitely going to be some events in the coming weeks, and maybe this can help you get a grasp on what you want to play in those coming showdowns or even at your locals. If you like this video, please comment, please subscribe. Let me know what you think of these decks. Let me know what you think of the analysis. And look forward to seeing you guys soon. Take care.